higher, so I may not need this. We'll try to get you another mic. All right. All right, I'm going to just speak up really loud either way. It's good to see everybody once again. We're going to be talking about the future, the past, the present, the future a little bit of medtech and ways we can future-proof ourselves as medtech professionals, whether that's regulatory, product development, or quality. So before we kick the panel off, Mike, let's start with you. Why don't we give just a quick 1 or 2 minute introduction and origin story?
Origin story. Thank you, Etienne. Well, first of all, I'm just curious, and this is a bit of a loaded question. How many of you know me or know of me already? A few of you. Okay, the reason why I ask is because my involvement with Greenlight goes back almost a decade. In fact, when I started working with the company, I think you had about 5 or maybe 6 employees. What are you up to now?
What is it, 2? 2 to 50?
Yeah, so I remember those olden times. Etienne mentioned the podcast series. Prior to Etienne joining the team, John Spear and I did something north of 120 podcasts. And now with Etienne, I think that number is somewhere, I don't know, 130, 140, something like that. So I've been doing this for a long time. My background is in biomedical engineering. That's what my PhD is in. I started out in this business about 30 years ago, I'm sure before some of you were born, as an R&D engineer, designing medical devices myself, before transitioning to the dark side, in my case not marketing, but regulatory. And so now I primarily work as a regulatory consultant for a wide variety of companies. I also work as a consultant for the FDA, as well as Health Canada and a few of the other regulatory agencies around the world. And the reason why I say that is because, quite frankly, not a lot of people that can say that work on both sides of that proverbial fence. And the last thing that I'll say is I also teach part-time, although I've cut way back on my academic teaching. I only teach now at Cornell. So that's a tiny bit about me for those of you that don't know me, and for those of you that do. Now you have a face to match with a voice, although maybe that's not necessarily a good thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. We're really excited to have you with us today. Edwin, what about you?
I've been in the industry about 25, 30 years now. Quality regulatory, I'm a microbiologist from graduation. Never used it yet, being a regulatory to that degree. So, as I said before, my passion's innovative products, innovative companies coming forward, getting involved with the new companies. One of the areas is, that was mentioned there, I do teaching as well. We've recently in Scotland set up with Strathclyde University and Glasgow University a module for regulatory to bring it through the new biomechanical engineers, so they actually know what they're getting into in the industry. So it's like 20 lectures, some 20 lectures on regulatory, how do you deal with it, and actually the feedback so far is it's allowed them to get jobs in the market quicker. They're not just going in there as an engineer, they can actually go in there and talk about regulatory rather than just engineering, and it's giving them an introduction to what they're going into the real world. It's not just all make things out of bits of whatever materials, components, and take it to market, yet they actually learn a wee bit about what they're going into, the fun and games that are going to come.
What's wrong with going right into engineering?
Oh, we're just educating them a bit more.
Super excited to have you. I'm curious if anybody came from further away than Scotland. I'll give you a free book if you have. You need more than that, but thank you. Glad you're with us today, Edwin. Chester, why don't you round us out?
Yeah, no problem. Is this thing on? Can y'all hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, so Chester Burress with Valentium. I have 30 years basically in the medical device field, all mainly active implantable medical devices. Started with a pacemaker, implantable defibrillator company. Moved from there to LVAD, left ventricular assist device development. That was a lot of fun. Good exposure there. Then ventured off into the neurospace, vagus nerve stimulation specifically. My first stint at that, we were doing for epilepsy, clinical depression. Those were the 2 main indications. Ventured off into the mechanical world, into developing nitinol for certain Martensitic situations for root canals. Then got back into the neurospace where I spent the last 12 years before I joined Valentium, doing a stroke indication. Got FDA approval there. And then I realized I had about maybe 15, 20 years left in my career. I figured in today's world that was maybe 1.5 indications that I could actually get out there. So joined Valentium with a bunch of my old buddies, and now working on currently about 7 or 8 different indications in parallel. So I'm excited to be in that space.
Well, thank you for being with us. And Kennedy tells me I should introduce myself just in case. My name is Etienne Nichols. I work with Greenlight Guru as a medical device guru. Prior to that, I was a mechanical engineer. I worked on a drug delivery combination product as a project manager. That's how I got my PMP. And so project management is near and dear to my heart. But I'm excited to be with you all. Also, if you want to follow up with any of these guys, find them on LinkedIn, reach out to them. Find me on LinkedIn, add me, because Kelly just put me on her board. I guess now we're competing with some LinkedIn metrics. So I don't work here yet, but that's now I'm going to be judged by those metrics. So it's good to see you all. Good to be with you. Add us. Let's get on to today's topic. So the first question I want to talk about was the Orange County MedTech ecosystem. Considering our friend Edwin from Scotland might not be let's start with Mike. You can kind of tell us what your knowledge is of the MedTech ecosystem here in Orange County, things we need to know, those of us working here.
Well, actually, I'm not sure I can give you a much better answer because I come from San Diego, which is not Orange County. I mean, I don't know. Let's put it this way. I would ask the counter question, what would make things different here for medical devices in Orange County or even in Southern California in general as opposed to the rest of the country and the rest of the world? Maybe I'm naive, but I do business all over the entire world, and I see, regrettably, a lot of people face the same problems, and even more regrettably, a lot of people repeat the same mistakes over and over and over again. And that's, maybe as I get older, it's just a source of frustration to me. But, so I'm not answering your question, but in part, purposely not answering your question, at least not directly.
That's the life of a moderator. They just, no, thank you. It's good.
And a politician.
Yeah, that's true. Maybe, let's just see a show of hands. Who all here is from Orange County? Okay, those of you who are, look around, see those names, and while it's true, and I totally agree, quality is quality wherever you stand in the world, it's good to have people in your corner, you know, who you can go to, maybe meet up in person. Obviously, we're still working out how to be in person, so it's good to, to think about those things. One other thing I might ask then is a top quality objective for a medtech professional. Now, this is a little bit of a nebulous question, but I look at a medical device company as kind of a three-legged stool. Obviously, we need safe and effective devices. They have to be legal devices, and then they have to be profitable because, money is the air companies breathe. What are some objectives that you would see as things that we should really be focusing on in 2024 as we move into 2024? Chester, maybe I'll start with you.
Yeah, no problem. The biggest thing that I see is efficiency. In the quality world, you can definitely get bogged down in inefficient processes, inefficient programs, redundancy, and things of that nature. But the key, other than what you just said, the main objective for me, I was also the general manager of quality at my former employer for 10 years. So having efficient processes, it allows you to be profitable, right? It allows you to affect your patients' lives more quickly and more efficiently. It also allows you to mitigate and reduce risk more effectively. So the efficiency in the quality space is where I would lean as the main objective for me.
Edwin, what about you?
Follow on there, I would probably say be willing to make decisions. One of the things that I see is the mistakes is people don't want to make decisions. They're scared to make that decision instead of just going for it and say, right, that's what we're doing. Because you'll get nowhere if you'll come to the crossroads. So if you follow, the efficiency is key, and don't get bogged down, as I say, because you've got this, even if you're bringing in consultants, find out more about them, choose the right partner that's going to give you the best efficiency, who's going to bring your product to market, and who's going to support you with it. If you pick the wrong partner, it's going to take time, it could bankrupt you, and you have to make it look at that. Look at the processes and make sure they're efficient. They're not just there to stop you doing your development, because you're the innovators. In the past, quality regulatory can sometimes stop you innovating. Make sure you choose the right partner, and make sure you make the decisions, just don't sit on the fence.
Michael, I'll ask you the same question I ask sometimes mistakenly on the podcast. Do you have thoughts?
You're coming to learn a little more about me than yeah, Eddie, and I think it's a terrific question, and I'm going to answer your question in my unique Mike Drues style. I'm going to sort of give it a little bit of a twist. Oftentimes when people introduce themselves to me, they say, you know, I work in quality compliance, quality assurance, whatever it is. I'm often tempted to respond by saying, quality as opposed to what? Crap. And I'm being 100% serious. Because I would like to think that we as medical device professionals would do the things that we know we should do, or at least we should know that we should do, regardless of whether it's required by the FDA or not, regardless of somebody says that you must do this. I mean, it just drives me nuts that how so many people in this industry, and admittedly, I'm stereotyping here, there are exceptions, of course, but as I get older, I see this over and over where, and for those of you that have heard our podcast, you've heard me say this before, when a company gets a 510K, when they get a de novo granted, when they get a PMA approved, when they get ISO certified, when they get a CE mark, that's the academic equivalent of being a C student. That just means that you're passing. That does not mean that you're making a safe and effective product. It certainly does not necessarily mean that you're making a good product. I know lots of physicians that for whatever reasons will never in a million years use a particular device, or to be fair, this is true for drugs as well, even though it's gone through the FDA, even though it's made these requirements. So as I get a little older, I'm trying to set the bar a little higher. I think we as an industry can aim for more than just being a C student. Maybe I'm naive, maybe I just fell off the truck, the turnip truck yesterday, but I believe that this can exist in the real world, not just in the world of unicorns and rainbows, but in the world that we live in. That's my response.
You mentioned doing the right thing, and it made me think of a story that, hopefully this isn't too irrelevant and they don't kick me out for bringing this up, but I was reading recently about the Hurricane Katrina and how the government sort of botched that situation. But Walmart, the CEO of Walmart stepped up and said, listen guys, we're going to meet this head on, and a lot of people are going to have to make decisions above your pay grade, so above all, do the right thing. And that should be the way it is always, and so that makes sense. Forgive me for the non-med tech illustration, but let's ask again a different question. Just kind of on the coattails of your analysis there. Some people see quality as just a set of necessary evils, but other companies utilize it and look at quality as a competitive advantage. So maybe Mike, we can start with you. How can companies utilize quality as a competitive advantage?
Well, quality certainly can be used as a competitive advantage, and I'll let the others speak more directly to that. I'd like to go on a small tangent to that and illustrate how regulatory can be used as a competitive advantage. This is something I call competitive regulatory strategy. And basically the idea is very simple. It's very easy to get your device through the FDA and onto the market, to tick the boxes that are required. The challenge is, what can you do, and this is especially true not so much in the 510K world, but in the de novo world and in the PMA world, what can you do to make it more difficult for your competitors to follow in your footsteps? That's something, and again, I've done lots of podcasts and webinars on this for those of you that are interested, but at least in my 30 years of experience, and I would love to hear from our other panelists if they would agree or they disagree, most people view regulatory, and probably quality as well, as nothing more than a set of boxes that you have to tick on a form. And I'm sorry, but I think anybody that is in this business that approaches it that way, quite frankly, they should not be in this business. Because it's not about filling out forms. It's not about ticking boxes and dotting I's and cross T's. It's about a lot more than that. But you're right, it can definitely be used as a competitive advantage to make it more difficult, maybe not impossible, but more difficult for your competitors to follow in your footsteps.
Cool. Edwin, what do you think?
Yeah, following on there, I think, yes, it's not just a tick box. It will make you stronger. A lot of the companies I see do make mistakes. They think they have to do that just for the tick box, get it to market quickly. But they don't actually think, what's the next step when they get to market? Is it going to be investor ready or due diligence ready? Then when they get somebody who comes in, like one of the bigger companies that want to buy it off them, and they've got gaps everywhere because they've not done the work right, they have not collected the correct clinical data, or even one of the things we've seen recently is I've got products that we've got CE mark 510K and nobody wants to use it. They've not actually spoke to the nurses, the doctors, one of the things in Europe is it's kind of scary is they don't go and talk to nurses. They're scared that that they will be made redundant if we bring in this new technology. And they just go, oh, it just doesn't sell, it goes on the shelf. There's no information there for them, so it's not really following on whether it's a quality advantage, but quality is going out and doing your homework and seeing, is somebody going to buy this product? The quality will take care of itself if you're doing the right thing, but you need to look at the product, bring the new device forward, is it going to be used? And then after, when you collect that information, is how you're using it to take it forward and expand it, because most times startups, spin-ups, and early stages, they want to be acquired. And that's where I've seen companies fall flat in the face because the quality wasn't there. The regulatory was there because they ticked the box with the 510K. It's getting slightly harder in Europe now with the new MDR, which I can say is a mess at times. And it will stop innovation. And again, a lot of that is tick boxing. That's not good quality, good regulatory. That's just politicians get involved. And you're seeing the consequences now. People are coming to the US more. And it's coming, another thing is easier, that it's more straightforward, at least you talk to the FDA. But again, MDR, IVDR is probably more like a tick box. They've not thought about it through. Yes, it might look good quality, but it's not actually going to have any benefit to the patient safety, I don't think. Anybody can make these files up in their back garden if they wanted. Which is where the issues came from originally, is fraud, whatever. But if they don't have do the right thing and they don't have that information there, and again, is somebody going to use it? If nobody's going to use it, what's the point?
Chester, maybe we'll tweak the question for you, and we'll just I'll see whether or not you agree with Edwin. He talked about making decisions quickly, and I know manufacturing is one of your more stronger suits. I remember being a manufacturing engineer working on neurosurgical equipment, and sometimes making decisions was tough. So how can you make those quality decisions quickly and maintain quality? Thoughts?
Yeah, it's still with efficiency in processes and such. With respect to manufacturing, what you have to be able to do is process inputs and outputs, quickly and efficiently, and towards an end goal, not just necessarily to check a box, with respect to what you're supposed to be doing in manufacturing. So, with respect to having a competitive advantage on the manufacturing side, I have a lot to say about the others, but on the manufacturing side, you can still have compliant, very efficient processes quality-wise on the manufacturing side of things. Quality is the most important, because if you do the minimum, you're going to get complaints. You're going to get return goods, right? That's going to bog down your entire system. Then you have to report all of those, and then you have to justify all of those. So doing it right the first time is very important.
Very cool. Okay, let's move on to a different question then, and that is more how to keep up with or stay current with quality regulatory requirements. Knowing that quality is quality, kind of to rephrase what Mike said, quality is quality wherever you are. And Edwin, we'll start with you since you're in the middle. It's hard to start, I hate, the guy in the middle always gets the short end of the stick. Apologies. So we're going to start with you. But we've got, QMSR coming. We've got recently the LDT to IVD proposed ruling and different things like that. How do you keep up with the regulatory environment to make sure that, not just to tick all the boxes, but to make sure that we're maintaining legality and so forth?
There's various options. This, networking, LinkedIn's another phase, but there's various things you can go and collect the data. I wish they would stop changing the regulations as much, because some things that you do see the regulations and the guidance changing for nothing, and it's just adding a lot of time and effort to companies who are maybe halfway through their development, and there's not really a lot of change, but they're having to readdress things. So it's maintaining what standards are changing. It's somebody within the company or external who will support you just monitoring these changes that are happening, because just now it's coming thick and fast. There's other things are changing. Europe's one, it's like a moving target. The FDA are bringing in new regulations or updating things. One of my fears is they don't follow what's happening in Europe, because I think it's just chaos. But it's more just online standards committees, whatever. Looking at LinkedIn is one of the best places, because it's more just finding out what's changed, to do the homework yourself, don't listen to other people because they all interpret it differently. And the interpretation could be, it's like, oh God, that means my product's coming off the market too. You don't need to do anything. Do your own homework and try and validate it yourself. Because they say you've got people who won't want to make decisions, who will just do everything, it's black and white, and then you've got people who look at it and say, like, this is what we need to do. We don't have to do it all because it doesn't affect. So it's more make your own decision and find that information yourself. Yes, use LinkedIn, use various websites, but validate it yourself. At least you know what's coming and what the changes are.
Okay. Mike, what about you? How do you keep up with the changing regulations?
Well, once again, great question, and I believe that education is truly a lifelong process. And just like as a risk management plan or something like that, you're not supposed to create it once and then never touch it again. Even though you might tick that box on the regulatory requirement, you've violated the whole principle, the whole philosophy of why we do this. So let's start out with the obvious. Clearly, attending conferences like this is a good start. Other professional conferences, depending on your subject matter expertise. Taking classes, whether it's through an academic institution. I've taught in probably about 15 different graduate schools over the years in regulatory. Whether it's going to networking events. Let's not overlook the obvious, listening to podcasts and webinars from Greenlight, involving myself and other people. Those are all the obvious ones. I had to get that little plug in there. Not that I really need it, but had to get the plug in there. But those are the obvious ones. But in terms of the regulation itself and keeping up with the changes, with all due respect, what's changed? I'm constantly reminded, and I got to look up this guy's name again because I've used this quote before. I've constantly been reminded of the old French philosopher who said, the more things change, the more they remain the same. I don't see a lot of changes, certainly not in the regulatory world. Yeah, FDA puts out guidance after guidance, which, oh, by the way, part of it is because, quite frankly, somebody has to justify their job description. Really, but what is different about it? That's why, for those of you that know me or have listened to some of our discussions, I focus not on the regulation, but on what I call the regulatory logic. Because if you understand the regulatory logic, you don't have to worry about the regulation. As a matter of fact, I take it a step further. Good regulation should always make sense. Good regulation should always be logical. If it's not logical, if I cannot explain the regulation, not in regulatory or quality terms, but if I can't explain it in engineering or medical terms, it's not good regulation. Maybe that's naive. Perhaps some people might think it is. But keeping up, yeah, you got to keep up, but you got to know how to think. You got to know how to think critically.
You should know 5 points now.
I try. I try. How about if we do it together?
Yeah, with the baseball bat.
Okay, Chester, tell us how to think critically.
Well, I would say trust but verify. And this applies to, one of my medical device companies, there were 9 of us, and we went through feasibility all the way through FDA approval. How do we do that? By having appropriate partners and contractors out there that we could rely on. On the regulatory space, had several different entities feeding me information, right? And then, of course, I verified it with a bigger company because I've worked with some big companies, work with a bigger company now. We have staff that do that. Same thing, I still employ a third-party company plus staff to feed in independent information and then verify it and apply appropriately. Or get systems in place externally and apply them to whatever you've got going on. With respect to regulatory changing as such, I agree that the fundamentals of regulatory stuff, it remains the same, basically, with respect to trying to fundamentally have the patient be safe, right? The specifics is where you can get bitten. For example, 10974 is an MRI standard, if you will, and test methods change, right, from one version to the next, and you could be submitting with the old test method, although the what's intended is the same, the test method is different, and that goes with a bunch of different things. So you do have to get into the specifics at times to make sure you're doing exactly what's intended. At a minimum, you always go above and beyond. But I agree, the fundamentals of regulatory basically stay the same. But if you don't have someone or some entity helping you pay attention to the specifics, then it's a lot of work on yourself to try to keep up.
Being, I think I might be the youngest one up here, so I'm just gonna, hope that things will change for the better. But I'm just thinking of one thing that may have changed recently, and that's artificial intelligence. It seems like it's the most recent buzzword. A couple of years ago it was blockchain. Everybody wanted to talk about blockchain. So I want to bring that up just to see what your thoughts are, whether from a product use standpoint or operationally, how that could impact a regulatory or quality professional or product development even affect their life. Chester, do you want to start? We'll just go down the line.
Yeah, I'm a bit of a traditionalist, for you electrical guys out there, I'm a very low pass filter, right? I change slowly with respect to those things. I do think that AI is powerful. I think that it's informative and can point you in some definitely good directions. I also think it's very dangerous because without verifying what you're trusting, right, you can go into a situation where you're off in, left field somewhere. So while I'm a fan of AI and its power, I don't yet understand it enough to be able to apply it effectively to anything that I've got going on.
What about you, Edwin?
Well, before we introduce AI, can we get rid of stupidity first?
You got to start with intelligence first,
Yes.
right? Yeah.
Yes, yeah, I'm following along. Yes, it can be useful, but we need to be able to control it and make sure it is useful. The data it's collecting, the information that's in there is correct, and if it's not correct, it's going to be making a hell of a lot of decisions for you, especially when you're bringing in new technology that's going to be making decisions for surgeons, clinicians. That kind of scares me, because I've seen what's happened with software before, and if it starts to take the decisions out of the clinicians, then are they going to stop making the clinical decisions properly, or using their technique, their experience? And I'll use an analogy, not medical, but in soccer, with VR, with the technology, the television, and referees are not making decisions because they're relying on technology, instead of just going back to make the decision. And that's my worry about AI. Sometimes it's all great for going forward, but if it's not used and controlled properly, we could be in a mess.
Mike?
Well, first of all, I got to say, as an engineer, I find this phrase, artificial intelligence, to be so overused today. Because I look at so many products in the medical device world, but also in the outside the medical device world, that have no intelligence in them whatsoever, artificial or otherwise. So let's be careful about the terminology. That's number one. Number two, more from a regulatory perspective, small plug for Greenlight. Prior to Etienne joining the team, when John Spear, the co-founder of Greenlight, and I did our first podcast on AI back in, I think it was 2019, that was the most the most popular, the most frequently listened to podcast in the medical device universe that year. And the reason why I mention it is because I think one of the reasons why is I know that's a powerful word, but I chastised FDA for at the time what they were taking this, I don't want to get too much into the details here, but the locked algorithm approach. That is holding us back so much. And long story short, and I think Eddie and you and I did an update on this podcast just within the last couple of months, I'm happy to say that FDA has now sort of gotten past that a little bit, but interestingly enough, and I don't mean this to be self-serving, but many of the ideas that came out of the new updates at FDA handling AI were right out of our podcast. These were suggestions that I made 5 years ago. These are suggestions that I made to the companies that I was working for at that time and still do to this day. And one of the things that drives me nuts, not just for AI, but in a lot of areas, so many people in our industry, and again, I realize I'm stereotyping here, this is not for everybody, but so many people in our industry, they use regulation, they use FDA as an excuse for holding us back. And I'm sorry, but I refuse to use that as an excuse to hold us back. FDA has a very difficult job to do. As one of my friends who used to be a senior reviewer at CDRH responded saying, physicians can kill patients one at a time, but an FDA reviewer can kill patients thousands at a time. And that's something that I think more of us in this industry should remember. Is the FDA efficient? Absolutely not. They're part of the US government. What part of the government is efficient? Look at the IRS. But nonetheless, they have an important job. So Whether you're working in AI or not, I think the broader, the more important message I'm trying to make here is don't use regulation or the FDA or the EU or any notified body. Don't use that as an excuse to hold you back. I tell my customers all the time, if you can convince me on your biology and your engineering, because even though I'm a regulatory consultant, I never start with the regulation. That has disaster written all over it in every language. I always start out with the biology and the engineering. If you can convince me of the biology and the engineering, I say to them, don't worry about the regulation. We'll figure out a way to make that work. Don't worry about the FDA. We'll figure out a way to make that work. But if you can't begin with the biology and the engineering first, you've got bigger problems to worry about, in my opinion. Is that an answer for your question, Edwin?
Yeah, that makes sense. Going back to our previous question about keeping up with things, during our podcast, I tried to learn this acronym. I don't know if I've got it. MLDSF, I think, Machine Learning Device Software is what they're calling AI ML.
It's a bunch of gobbledygook, yeah.
So, yeah, the
If you
acronym.
can't baffle them with brilliance, if you can't dazzle them with brilliance, baffle them with, you know what.
Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit and let's talk about the differing, maybe the shifting perspective. So we have quality, we have regulatory, we have product development. Those are I guess, the big three sometimes that I think about. And sometimes they're focused on different things. Maybe qualities, maybe they're focusing on bolstering the internal processes. Product development wants the most innovative approach, and regulatory needs to make sure they can have something that's actually works and so forth and can be submittable. How do you shift those perspectives and get everybody to work together? Any thoughts on creating that collaborative where everybody speaks the same language? Do you want to start, Mike?
Is that a rhetorical question?
You have to.
Sure, I'd be happy to, but I really want to hear what the other folks have to say as well. And maybe at some point we can involve the audience too. Yeah, so how do we get everybody to play nicely together in the same sandbox is basically what I think you're asking. And by the way, this is a problem that I see not just in companies, but at the FDA as well, especially for any of you that might work in the area of combination products, because that's a whole different conversation. But in terms of getting people to work together, I'll share with you, based on my own personal experience, as I said earlier, when I started out in this business over 30 years ago as an R&D engineer, designing devices myself, one of the things that drove me absolutely nuts with regulatory people is they would tell me I had to do something. I would say, okay, why do I have to do that? Because it's required by the FDA. That is not a good reason to do anything. I'm sorry, it is not. That's a way to treat a 2-year-old. If a 2-year-old child asks a parent, why do I do this? Because I'm your parent. Okay, you have to do it. For a 2-year-old, that should be okay. But for us, that should not be acceptable. As I said earlier, there should always be a logical explanation for the regulation. And it's incumbent on your regulatory professional to be able to explain that logic to me as an engineer. And if you can't, then you need to go to the FDA and explain it to them why this regulation doesn't make sense, and here's what you need to do anyway. Or, dare I say it, maybe you shouldn't have the job that you have.
Okay. No.
Agree the regulatory people in that environment, too many of them walk in with a pile of standards and just put them in the middle of the table and say, that's what we need to meet, and without telling, and you just see the engineers with, I'll use an old Scottish statement, blanket look, where they just stare at them going, what? And what do we need? And at most clients we go to, it's like, can you tell us what to do? We'll design it, we'll develop it, you've got the brains, can you just help us how to get that to market? And that's probably the key to, instead of, if a regulated person walks in and goes, poof, I'd walk back out the door and say, no. How do we do it? Because that's not my role. I'll help you, I'll work with you, I'll understand it, I'll educate you, you educate me, but if it's not coming together, and we're seeing this more and more in Europe again under the new regulations, with the new requirements from it comes from a clinical point of view, and keeping product in the market. Departments are having to talk to each other. If they don't, there's things falling down. But risk, clinical, should always been talking to each other. In the past they didn't. They now have to in Europe. They bring in all the testing. It's trying to get people to talk. It's scary. They just don't want to talk because it's their own that's their environment, it's breaking down the barriers so they actually come together. So they don't, they'll have a job because the product will come off the market.
Quick follow-up to what Edwin just said before we continue. So, for those of you that know me, you may remember that I used to teach pathophysiology in medical school, and one of the things I used to love to say to my medical students, some of you have heard the adage, the surgery went perfectly, but the patient died anyway. many of you have heard this before. The surgery went perfectly, but the patient died anyway. Well, the engineering equivalent of that is we designed the medical device perfectly, and yet the patient died anyway. The regulatory equivalent of that is we followed the regulation perfectly. That is, we did all that FDA or Health Canada or whoever it is asked us to do, and yet the patient died anyway. Unfortunately, these problems happen more frequently than some people might like to think. Something to think about. Of course, not to your products. Never to your products. Competitors' products, but not to yours, right? Sorry, go ahead.
No, yeah. Chester, any follow-up?
Yeah, sure. So circling back to the question of how do you get all the entities to work together toward the end goal, I agree with all of what was said. So instead of, on top of kumbaya meetings, that gets everybody up and going, the way to effectively do it is to have a cohesive system, an efficient system that takes all relevant parties in together toward a common goal, basically from feasibility all the way through design transfer and ultimately validation and such. You have stakeholders from all groups basically involved the entire time with a common goal, and that's when you get everybody sort of on the same page in getting you to your end goal much more efficient. I'm a firm believer of it's black and it's white with respect to inputs and outputs. The gray area is the creative portion, but with respect to inputs and outputs and approvals, should be rather black and white.
Sometimes we work in hierarchical situations where it's hard to defer, or we typically defer to maybe somebody else. Maybe they're higher up, they know more, they have more clout. And I'll just use an example from my wife since she's not here. She's a critical care nurse. And so she's been in surgical operations where she's the kind of nurse, she is stereotypical. I'm glad she's not here for this reason. But so the surgeon maybe touched the lamp or something before going back, and she said, "Hey, you've contaminated your glove." I said, it's fine. She said, "Don't be stupid." A nurse typically might not do that to a surgeon, but quality is everyone's job. And so, yeah, that's just a thought that popped into my mind. Everybody has the responsibility if you have the knowledge and the wherewithal. So, let's ask the audience, though. What questions do you have for, there's so many years of experience on this stage. What questions would you like to ask them? Go ahead.
So what do you find are your best tools or techniques for educating your incoming customers for readiness? Because readiness is the key to work with you. What have you found to be those best tools and techniques to get them up to par?
Yeah, it depends on what entry level they're coming to us at, right? If it is someone with a scientific solution out of a university, I would very quickly assess where they are, what do they have in mind, and then it's you don't bring someone up to speed for a full development cycle right away. You can't handle it, right? You basically say this is the sandbox you're playing in, right? You're getting to this feasibility space. This is what your outputs are going to be. Your long-term goals down here, they may be 10 years down the road, right? So I would ask right away, do you have, it doesn't necessarily have to be novel, but preferably a scientifically novel indication. Have you done anything into the review of reimbursement codes, right? Have you done any review into IP out there? That's the level of education that someone just coming to the table, I think, needs to get. With respect to someone coming to the table like, hey, I've already got a widget. We've already made 100 of these. We've gone through these things. What we need to do is bring it in and create a DHF or a DMR or whatever in order to be able to submit these things. Well, that's a different level of education for that particular group. So I think that you would assess it based on at what level they're coming to you in.
Edwin, you want to educate people on how to work with you?
Yeah, first thing I say is, do you have enough money?
That's a good start.
Because I think a lot of people, especially innovative companies, spin-outs, startups, they come with this great idea, but they don't have an idea of what's actually going to be meeting them head on with regards to regulatory, the costs for testing, making sure the product's safe. They think they could just make it in their back garden, in their shed, and they can start, maybe 40, 50, 60 years ago, but it's...
Oh no, that happened recently during COVID. That's the whole EUA, but that's a topic of a different discussion.
But it's, try to get an understanding is, do they understand what the world they're coming into? Where's the product going to be used? Where did the idea, I always ask, where did your idea come from? Because I've met people who've been sitting and watching their wife give birth and come up, Indian engineers coming up with ideas, and they're like, it's not going to work. And it's like, tell them the baby's ugly. And that's probably the worst thing is, I personally try and get that out of them early on. Is this going to work? What's it going to take to get to market? And what do they need to get there? Because one, they're going to probably need investment. So you're giving them an idea of what's the investment. Have they actually spoke to anybody that they can use it? If it's coming out of the universities or nurses, yes, it may be a good idea. But actually doing a wee bit more homework before they actually come in and go, right, we're ready to go. Because you mentioned they'll come to you with widgets. I've made this, we've tried it on somebody. Who? And one of the things, I'm not sure if it's fully in the US, but in the UK, in some of the hospitals, you've got surgeons companies, oh, we've tried it on somebody. What?
Right.
Okay, and okay, we 3D printed it and it was used in surgery. Okay, I don't want to know anything to do about that. I'll say, thank you, give that to somebody else. did you kill anybody? But it's more of, do you know this is going to work? I'm looking at the risks of bringing it to market and them understanding, not just from it could save lives, is they're coming into a whole big world of business. And some of them are so naive that they think, okay, I can take this to market, it's going to save 10 million lives. Or they see, they've done their homework a wee bit and says, oh, the market's 10 billion. Yeah, but that's probably two of the big players. The rest of it, you've got this smaller bit. Do you really want to go up against these guys?
I love that phrase, tell the baby it's ugly. Although if I show you a picture of my baby, guys, you don't think maybe if I tweak the question for you, Mike, maybe, you can answer either question you want, but sometimes you talk about good regulatory people. There are not a lot of good regulatory professionals out there. What's the difference in a bad regulatory versus good? How to be a great one? Any thoughts?
Yeah, great question. Actually, let me come back to this gentleman's question first,
please.
and then we can talk about that one. Sir, may I ask what's your first name?
Roy.
Roy? Roy, very clever question, I thought. How do you prepare yourself? How do you get ready to talk to somebody like me or like us? Quite frankly, I don't think I've heard that question before. First of all, Roy, I hope I don't present such a intimidating personality that you can't feel comfortable talking to me early on. I don't have any prerequisites that you have to, do something. Or in fact, I'll take it a step further. One of my frustrations with a lot of medical device companies, certainly not all of them, is they don't bring regulatory into the process until they're very close to the point of design freeze, if not maybe even at design freeze. And some of you are shaking your heads in the back, so maybe I'm not the only one, right? Well, the reason why that frustrates me, I don't want to go so far as to say that that's wrong, but as a former R&D engineer myself, there is so much more that I can do to help you early on in the process when the product is still being designed. Once you get to the design freeze, it becomes much more difficult, much more time-consuming and expensive, sometimes even impossible to make changes. And just as a simple anecdotal example, before my wife and I moved to San Diego almost 5 years ago, we lived in Boston, and when we were finishing at the time the basement in our house, our contractor marked out on the floor in chalk lines where the walls were going to be. And he said about 4 or 5 times, he said, make sure that these are where you want the walls to be, because while it's still in chalk, it's very easy to move them. If we want to move this wall 6 inches one way or the other, we just rub out the line and move it over. Once he builds the walls, we can still move them, but it becomes a heck of a lot more time-consuming and expensive to do. Bring regulatory in, and not just regulatory, this is one of the most basic concepts of the design controls, when you understand the philosophy, not the regulatory gobbledygook, but the philosophy of the design controls, is bring the other subject matter expertise in, whether it's regulatory or quality or manufacturing, whatever it is, as early in that process as possible.
Do you think it's fear of the cost of bringing in regulate early? That's what I find, that when you talk to people, they've got a certain amount of, it's proof of concept, it's early stage, but they don't want to get regulatory because, oh, it's going to cost me money.
Maybe we should have, talk about, compare our rates before we do that. Well, it's a fair question, and some people could certainly make that argument. I guess my question would be, what is the cost of you not doing it?
Yeah, I think it's education of these people, because they come and they go, they see what's out there, regulatory consultants, regulatory bodies, and the cost, and they go, okay, we can do it ourselves, we're engineers, or my nurse, I've developed this, I don't need them, I can read and understand. Okay, fine, that's what 20 years experience can throw out the window then. So I think a lot of people look on what we do as tick box paperwork, and that.
It's what gives regulation a bad name.
Yes, and that's trying to educate people coming into the industry or new people or people who are in the industry. This is not tick box. You have to think about it. It's not scary. We're there to help, but we're there to help you not make a mess and actually take the product to market quicker. Because if you don't get us early, it's not happening.
Taking that a step further, back to Etienne's second question of the difference between what I call an average regulatory professional versus a good one. And I don't mean to be patronizing here, but I think there's a lot of truth to this. We have a lot of average regulatory professionals out there. We have, in my opinion, very, very few good ones. What's the difference? As I used to say to my medical students, every surgeon has graduated from medical school. Does that mean that every surgeon is equally as good? Absolutely not. And by the way, I mentioned this in a presentation that I did a few years ago, and believe it or not, somebody, I think she was a nurse, she came up to me and said, "Oh, Mike, you can't say that. You can't say that not every surgeon is equally as good." I'm sorry, admittedly, I'm getting older. I don't have the patience for all this politically correct, hypersensitive nonsense. You don't want to think that some people are better than others. And I don't mean in terms of like the quality of the person, but in terms of, ability. I don't play the violin. I'll never get a job with the London Philharmonic. That doesn't mean that I'm a bad person. The same thing, every surgeon that's graduated from medical school, does that mean that every surgeon is equally as good? No. The same thing can be said for attorneys, for engineers, and dare I say it, for regulatory professionals.
I'd like to sort of add, the way that I can tell the difference between a good regulatory resource and just a decent. Basically, you've got two camps. You've got the camp that they're going to tell you what to do because the regulations tell you that's what you need to do. The real good ones, they get creative. They're like, okay, for human factors engineering, for example, you have 6 different user groups, but you don't really want to spend all the money across all 6 user groups. So then, a normal regulatory person say, well, you've got to do it because you've got to do so many people because you've got a user group. A good regulatory person will say, hey, you know what? We can leverage clinical experience for folks that are already out there. We can rationalize that you don't need to do that necessary user group. 1, because you don't have a critical task, which is something you have to assess. But 2, we can leverage known experiences, technologies, maybe things within your own company, and those are the guys, the ones that are trying to get you to be compliant, but get you to be as efficient as possible without wasting time, without wasting money. Those are the folks you want to latch on to.
Paul? No. Charles, please.
I've been doing this for a while, similar, maybe even a little bit more than some gentlemen on the dais there. And the thing that continues to bother me, I came up through the ranks, R&D, migrated a little bit, wandered with small startups. My background is not important here. Why don't I hear because it's good for the business? Why is it that, I go into, and I've been doing some consulting work for the last few years, but the thing that I usually bring to the table, the thing that I usually find most productive and most effective when talking with senior management or peers or other people that are coming up the ranks, and I'm trying to, show a little bit of the experiences that I've had, because it's the right thing to do for the business. Because these guidances, and I use the word guidances, I don't talk about the regulations, right, that the FDA has laid out, and the EU has laid out, all these other, they're there to help educate you. Good business planning, good regulatory planning, good manufacturing, right, all the G's, the GX people. Why don't we talk about it in that vein? Why is it always, and you'll excuse me, I'm a little bit of the chameleon that I'm here, so I'm putting on my quality hat for this afternoon, but why don't I hear you guys talking about it from that perspective? And I'll get off my soapbox, but I can stay up there. Mike, you and I have talked once or twice. I love the fact that you love the soapbox as well.
No, I think that's a good question, and to me, it's a fundamental, right? Everything should be done for the good of the business. Primarily, the number one goal that I actually think that needs to be put in forefront in all companies is what's good for the patient, right? Are you doing this for the patient? and which is why I try to tackle everything that way. I sort of already have the good for the business embedded in me a bit, and a lot of folks do when I talk about efficiencies and things of that nature. That's business related, right? That's doing things right for being able to have a business to help that patient. There are some, but if you're in this business for 30 years, you're basically a lawyer a bit, right? You've taken
Is that an insult?
No, you're as good as a lawyer to navigate regulations and such. That's sort of how it is. And if you're still in it, it's because you care about the quality of life of the people that you're affecting at the end of it. So I agree with your question, right? That it could be talked about more. But when you hear folks putting together systems that aid compliance or systems that aid complaints and things of that nature, that's all to be efficient in business for the bottom line. That's how I see it.
May I chime in on that one? And I'm sorry, sir, what's your first name?
Charles.
Charles. Nice to see you again, Charles. You said that we've talked before, so thank you for reminding me of that. For those of you that don't know me, you probably don't know how much Charles was just preaching to the choir on that one, because I could not agree with your sentiments more, Charles. And let me just, respond a slightly different way. Oftentimes, if I try to encourage one of my customers to do what I think is the right thing, but for whatever reason they don't want to do it because maybe they don't want to spend the time or the money, it's not required, I will throw the product liability flag. Some of you may know that I spend a lot of my time now working as an expert witness in medical device product liability cases. As a matter of fact, I said to my wife just the other day, if I wanted to, my product liability witness work is just going through the roof. I could completely stop doing regulatory consulting if I wanted to and just do the liability, the expert witness work. And as a matter of fact, most of the time, not always, but most of the time, I'm working on the side of the plaintiff. That is the side that's suing the medical device company, that is you all in this audience, right? And one of the things that I love about working with my attorney friends is they don't limit me to what the FDA may or may not require. Some of you may know that the U.S. courts, I don't know about in other countries, but here in the United States, suffice it to say that they are not keen on the whole 510K program for a whole bunch of reasons. But they don't want to know from me, did the company do what they were required to do? What they want to know from me is, did the company do what they should have done? What makes sense from a biology and an engineering perspective? The right thing, as some people might say. So, again, Charles, and to be fair, some of us, admittedly not many, but some of us are trying to sing those songs. And I know you're one of them as well. Our challenge is, how do we get a lot of other folks to join the chorus?
Can I answer that last bit?
Go ahead. We have 5 minutes, but go ahead.
No, 10 seconds. By taking Edwin's lead and educating people and giving them the primer as part of business school, engineering school, science schools, or any other, that people are not aware of the value of doing it right versus doing it over.
Could not agree more. But from the perspective of somebody who teaches in a graduate level course in an Ivy League institution in biomedical engineering, I'm not sure that they teach those things anymore. But that's a topic of a different discussion.
I think you had your hand up.
You were talking originally about moving walls with the chalk, how once you put up the walls or make the product, it's more expensive to change after it's already set in stone. Could you talk about strategies for how to accelerate the product change process when it comes to design controls?
Is that for
anyone?
Volunteer?
Yeah, so accelerating change, that's a tough one, right? It really is. The steps you have to go through, it's the same as doing product development. You basically go back and go through it. So I don't know that it can be accelerated unless you didn't do it very well the first time.
I don't see any fast track for it unless you've done preparation work beforehand and you're actually preparing and you're educating the engineers who are doing the R&D, that they're documenting what they're doing, and there's something that can be put in faster. But I know from even Europe, to make a change now, the notified bodies want a minor change and a major change. Before they didn't want minor. It's now major, and they're going, what? They're now asking questions on major and minor, so there's roadblocks all the way along from the regulator point of view, but it's more just planning.
That's actually a decent point. I suppose one thing you could do, I'm more familiar with the FDA, is have a pre-sub type meeting ahead of time on a change to let them know where you're going, possibly.
What's your first name, sir?
Matt.
Matt, great question, Matt. Thank you for asking. Here's my response. Back the truck up a step or two and ask yourself, why are you making that change? Does that change make sense? Because I'll share a statistic that maybe someone in the audience might not be aware of. One of the most common reasons why FDA issues 483 observations and in some cases warning letters is because of change management or the lack thereof. And to give a little bit of a plug to Greenlight, I did a webinar a few years ago on change management to try to help rectify this. So you specifically, Matt, referred to design controls, and this is something that I think the co-founder of Greenlight, John Spear, was exceptionally good at. Try to understand the philosophy of the design controls. And one of those philosophies is asking the right questions, solving the right problems. Why are you doing the change? I'm not suggesting that your change is right or wrong, good or bad, but start out with, why are you making that change? And if you have a good answer to that, hopefully something based on medicine or engineering, then by all means do it. And then you got to go through all that V&V stuff. You made the comment a moment ago, I think, how so many medical device companies, once they get a product onto the market, they're paranoid to change it. Not quite to the extent of a drug company, but even in the 510K world and the de novo world, companies are hesitant to change a product. As a matter of fact, one of the large companies that I used to work with, they said, as a matter of policy to their R&D engineers, do not make a change to your product that we cannot do under a letter to file. In other words, if we have to notify the FDA of this change, whether it's a special 510K or a PMA, a supplement, whatever it is, we ain't going to make this change. I mean, as a former R&D engineer myself, that just makes my blood pressure just shoot through the roof. Can you think of a more effective way to hold back progress, to hold back improvement? You're laughing, right? I wish I was facetious. I'm not. I'm 100% serious. So as I said earlier, don't use the regulation as an excuse to hold you back. If you have what you think is a legitimate reason to change, hopefully improve your product, and you're not exactly sure how to handle it yourself, then seek out somebody that is a little more knowledgeable or experienced or whatever. We can help you do that. But I refuse to let regulation hold us back.
Last question, it might need to be a speed round. Go ahead. You, yeah.
Yeah, sorry. A comment and a question. The comment is like, I don't know if there's in the graduate curriculum or whatever, but if anything's going to have to do with biomedical, there should be like an ethics course. I know that may sound...
Is that a rhetorical question?
Maybe there is. I don't know. But I mean, also having the mindset of, okay, what if this is going to be used on me or a relative or a parent or, a child? Have that mindset. I mean, not just what's good for the business, good for the patient, but, what if I need this thing someday?
Excellent point. And if I may, and again, I want to hear what you guys have to say, but...
Then the question was, there's talk about regulatory holding things up, but also regulatory, people not being prepared enough for advance. So where's I don't know, maybe an example of how to, ameliorate
yeah, great question.
Situation.
And again, I'll let these guys chime in as well, obviously, but what's your first name, sir?
Greg.
Greg, one of the most common questions that I get from people, from companies across the board, I get this question every week, sometimes even every day. Mike, you work as a consultant for the FDA, you work as a consultant for lots of different companies. If we came to the FDA with our new widget, whatever it is, what do you think FDA would want to see in terms of testing, in terms of evidence, benchtop, animal, clinical, what have you? And I say, you know what, I understand why that's an important question to you. I understand why you're asking me that question. But let's approach this from an entirely different way. Let's pretend, for the sake of discussion, that the FDA did not exist. And sooner or later, a family member or a friend or maybe even yourself will be on the receiving end of your medical device. I'm sorry, my memory is going. What's your first name again?
Greg.
Greg, what would you want to see, Greg,
Greg.
or me, Mike, in order to put my personal stamp of endorsement, if you will, to say that this is okay to use in my neighbor, in my spouse, or in my case, my 8-year-old grandson. And then, and only then, should we have go to the FDA and have an intelligent conversation about what needs to be done to bring this product out to the market. It's a very different approach compared to what most people take. In my opinion, it's my idea, so I'm inherently biased, but in my opinion, it makes more sense. But unfortunately, Greg, at least in my experience, if you want to disagree, please do, it's not a common approach.
I've seen it just with the light bulb moment, and following your conversation as well, about telling senior management, you could be on the end of this. It might be your mother, your daughter, but one of the things is during my training and when I do the discussions, I will talk to them and say the liability thing as well, because one of the things the light bulb came on my head when I first started out is a salesperson going into manufacturing and taking a set of devices out because he was going in for surgery the next day. He wanted the best, and I looked at him and went, what? He says, no, we know we don't make too good, it's not all good, so I'm going in there to make sure I've got the best, and I'm taking it in to give to the surgeon to use on me, and I went, Jesus. And that kind of scared me.
Yeah, when somebody's not willing to use their own product, that speaks loudly to me.
When I've come forward now with the way I am now, is I go in and I'll talk to them. I'll walk away from companies now if I then look at the CEO, the management, the investors, and they don't care what is actually going on. They just see money. And it's giving them that light bulb. I do the presentations and show, actually make it graphical, go on and take pictures of children, mother, father, and actually put it up there and they're going, why are you showing us this? Because if you don't get it right, that's what's going to end up. And I can, you go back the way, I can then find out when this happens, I can trace it back to your decision. And we can see it happening today, like Phillips.
Yeah.
We can see it happening.
Yeah.
So we look at the whole process and go, it's education from the higher to let them know. You make these decisions, you can't just pick on somebody. And I train the lower level people to say, if you don't like it, tell them that your job's not worth it. And if you want to be in court facing this guy, it's trying to get educated and people's mindset changing from that. And if they don't,
And that's got to come from management.
yeah, and management is sometimes harder because they've got the pressures of finance, business, and they sometimes turn their head off to safety. And but until you actually show them the black and white of something going wrong, or tell them, have you ever been in court when you're getting grilled by the lawyers?
Yeah, what if it's a recall or?
Yeah, they just, I've heard some of the companies I work for, they've had a recall, they're like, well, we need to stop this. We can't have our name in the press. I'm like, we can't, we just killed somebody. Well, we can put it and do it properly and sort it, but if you don't want to do that, goodbye.
Well, the regulatory device reporting is so opaque, unless you know where to look.
I know from even the EU that they don't, a lot of people don't report enough.
Yeah.
There's not enough, there's under-reporting
Right.
happens, even with IVDs as well, there is under-reporting on all that. We don't get enough people coming forward, nurses, doctors, surgeons, and just going straight and saying reporting it. Because a lot of the sales guys, when they go in and they know there's an issue, they'll try and smooth it over. We'll give you some free samples, we'll smooth it over with you, give you a discount, and it's that mentality you say to the salesman, that could have been you in there. You don't know, you could get hit with a bus and you go in for an operation, you get used one of your faulty products, you're dead.
Of course, Edwin, everything that you just said, all those examples were purely hypothetical.
Yes.
They could never happen in any of your companies, I'm sure.
The day I retire and publish a book.
I'll give you an example from somebody I heard from a friend of mine, Mark Duval, told me that medical device professionals is kind of like Dorothy going on to the Wizard of Oz. That's our goal. We want to get our medical device on the market. But you've got the CEO who is the Tin Man. He doesn't have a heart. No offense if you're a CEO. You've got the sales guys who are like the Scarecrow. They got no brains. Man, regulatory.
Wow.
That's all right, guys. You're not exempt.
You're alienating a lot of people.
You've got the cowardly lion, and unfortunately, that's regulatory sometimes for cowardly.
But let's be fair, if it weren't for the sales folks and the CEOs, we wouldn't be doing what we're doing.
Hey, they're all important. I'm just saying. I had to cut it off basically because it's time to network. It's good to see. Let's go ahead and give everybody a round of applause.